Bakwe. That is in a negative form. But there is other one where there is no obligation. It is absent. So in this case, there is absence of obligation. What we require is absence of obligation. You needn't wake up early as today is holiday at college. आज college में छुट्टी है. You need not wake up early. Or you can say you need not study as the exam is over. Or you can say you needn't finish the food. You needn't finish the food as you have no willing. Are you getting it? So it is not so that every time we need to obligate the things. When there is no requirement of obligation, you can always use a need not or needn't. Right? The next slide is about shall. Here, shall and will. Earlier also when we were learning tenses, I had told you about shall and will, which are always used with future tense. Shall is used for the future tense. It indicates following expressions. What does it indicate? Promise. Promise is vaido. There are few people, who uses shall to show, to express, to make their views clear that they are promising they are going to do the things. So here the expression is promise. Prohibition in negative. What is prohibition? To stop someone. किसी को रोकना. You have to not allow the things to happen. To prohibit. You are not required there. So that is prohibition in negative. How? Shall not will be the expression. That is prohibition in negative. Shall not. What is the idea of obligation? We have learned about obligation. And the most appropriate word expressing obligation is nothing but must. A higher version, a stressed on obligation, stronger way of obligating is ought to. But what is an idea of obligation? A very lighter mood where the things are going to be obligated but in a lighter mood, in a softer mood. Here the things are idea of obligation, that is shall. Offer or a service. Here to offer someone. To offer some tea, biscuits or any other services which to be offered, you always use shall. Let us see certain examples of shall. Yes, the picture shows that the company shall give bonus to the employees this year. You can see few people working over there. They are making or they are working or they are building some things, and there is a person on the top. That is the management person, the person who is going to be the employee, and there are few employers. Now, the company shall give bonus to the employees this year. This is showing a promise. They are promising that this year they are going to give them bonus. You shall be awarded by us. That shows that it has been promised that they are going to give you an award. Are you getting it? So here the thing shows that bonus of the employees is here and the company is going to provide the bonus. Right? Prohibition in negative. What is the picture showing? Missiles picture. Right. The missiles shall not be launched before the scheduled date or scheduled hour. Now here there is a prohibition. How? But that it should not be, it shall not be. There is a negative word called not. In a sentence when you have a negative word like no, not, none, neither, nor, all these words make a sentence negative. Here it has been prohibited. Prohibited in a negative way. The missiles shall not be launched before the scheduled date. Are you getting it? Here prohibition is shown but in a negative way. Shall not. Are you getting it? Idea of obligation. You shall have to submit your job work before the end of this week. Now there are certain assignments to be submitted. For mechanical, you have to submit your job work. Shall have to do certain work. An idea of obligation. You have been obligated. Yes. But in a lighter mood, in a softer mood. Shall is used to obligate. Remember, only the expression obligation, shall is not going to be the answer. Yes, But when there is an expression showing idea of obligation, there you should use a shall. Okay? So whenever you have an obligation, you should always try to see the answer as must. Right? A stronger way of obligation, ought to. But a lighter way is idea of obligation. And whenever there is an idea of obligation in the bracket, the answer will be shall. Okay? Now let us start the next one, that is offer or service. Shall I bring the documents for you? This is just a single example. You can have many more, like shall I do the work for you? Shall I bring a cup of coffee for you? Or say, shall I come along with you? So there are certain ways where you can offer a service, and whenever you are offering a service to the person, you should be polite enough to say. Here we usually use shall as an example. Right? So there is shall I bring the documents, or shall I bring or shall I do certain work for you. The next one will be will. Will is used for the future, as you have seen that shall is also used for future. Similarly, will is also used for future tense. It indicates the expressions like intention, willingness, polite requests and assumption. Let me tell you something about intention. What is intention? Jani joine karayeli kriya, that is intention, done with a purpose. Without a purpose, it is done purposefully. Are you getting it? Something when done purposefully is called as intentionally done work. But something which is done by willingness, that is ichha shakti, potani ichha thi. So that is willingness. When done with a willingness, the expression is willingness. Right? Coming to polite request, it is namra vinanti, that is polite request. Let me tell you something about polite request. There are many words like may, like shall, like will, or even could, which can be kept as a request or a politeness, to show politeness, to show request. But whenever there is a bracket showing a polite request as an expression, usually we use will or would, according to the tense of the subject. Intention, willingness, polite request, and the last one is assumption. What is assumption? Assumed things. Dharana bandheli hoy evu. Assumption is something which is been assumed. Things are not in actually, they are assumed. Mane evu lagyu hatu ke. But there is no proof of what has been there. Assumptions cases are such cases where there is no requirement, there is no feedback taken. It is assumed by a single note. Correct. Let us see which are the examples of intention, willingness, polite request and assumption. The first one is about intention. I will go to the zoo next Sunday. Now look at this. I will go to the zoo next Sunday is an intentionally done work. I will not copy in the class. Again, there is an intention, there is a purpose behind it, a purposeful thing. I will be coming early for my extra lectures. Again, an intentional or a purposeful. The media will be emphasizing on the budget, an intentional thing. Correct. So certain things where intention is there, wherein you have to have a purpose behind the fact, it is intentional thing, and you can use will for such cases. Willingness athwa ichha shakti, you will like the painting when you see it. There is a painting drawing and it will be liked by you whenever you have seen the painting. So that is willingness. There are many cases. You will like to come along with me. You will love to have a coffee with me. Or say for example, you will be looking forward towards this new year. Or say you will like to know that your friend is getting married. There are certain cases where willingness is so much important, and wherever you have such willingness, you will always find an answer as will. Our next one is about polite request. Now, we have already learned that there are many cases where you can show your request. You can project that the request is done. Like, may I help you? A form of request. Or say, can I bring a cup of water? Again, a request. But here the most appropriate form of using a polite request or using will is in polite request. We usually use many such auxiliary verbs thinking that we are correct, but the actual and the correct form of using is here. Okay, let us see about the polite request. Will you clean this table, please? You are requesting in a polite manner. Will you please serve a cup of coffee? Again, a request, but in a polite manner, right? Now, most cases, this polite request will usually have a question mark. That means there will be interrogative sentences when you are using polite request. Okay. Next will be assumption. He will become an engineer, I think. But does he know that whatever he thinks is correct or not? No, it is only assumed things. It is only assumed that he will become an engineer. Or say, looking at her, I will think that he can become a good person. Or since his childhood, I feel he will surely go with my cousin along with his job. So there are certain things in assumption which is not proven, but it is assumed. The next slide is should. Should is the past of shall. It indicates expressions like obligation. Again, back to our must, back to our idea of obligation, that is shall, and ought to. We also have should, showing the same expression. Duty or desirability, advice or an assumption. Let us see all these three, starting with the obligation. You should wear safety equipments while working in an industry. So here there is an obligation, you should wear safety equipments. Or you should not finish your work in a hurry. Again an obligation. You should be in the class before I come. Again an obligation. You should keep your mouth shut when the lecture is going on. Again an obligation. All such cases where you are obligating a person or a thing or a situation, you usually use should. Right? So obligation, there are three more expressions, three more auxiliary verbs showing the word obligation, like must, should, and ought to. Must, should, and ought to. Right? Duty or desirability. Children should obey their parents and teachers. Should is always used for duty. You should help needy and poor. You should be careful while driving a car. Right? Again, certain expressions where you have to show the desirability. I should have done the work before. I should have kept food for my small kids. I should have come home early. Great. So there are certain things where should is used for duty, and it is also used as a desirability, that it is a desired thing to be done. Advise or assumption. We should help the needy. Here someone is giving an advice. But if I say it is a duty of a citizen that he should vote, that becomes a duty. Are you getting it? There are certain ways, there are very small difference between duty, between advice, between assumption, yeah, between obligation. So we have to be very clear, understanding the meaning of a sentence and then using the appropriate way of using or utilizing the auxiliary verb. Next one is would. Would is the past tense of will. It indicates following expressions like polite request, desire, preference, hypothetical situation. Now there are certain cases where polite request is required, like I had told you about will, desire and preference with second and third person. Again revising, first, second and third person. First person is I, second person is you, we, they. You, we and they. Third person is he, she and it. With second and third person you have polite request, desire, preference, right? And hypothetical situation is used with all situations. Polite request. Would you make the presentation for me? Here, if we use will you make the presentation for me? Again, it becomes a polite request. Will you please make the presentation for me? There are certain words where you should use, there are certain words for requesting, like saying please or saying or having a very, very politeness, saying could you please do the things, stressing on please. So there are certain words which shows request. Would you make the presentation for me is one such, right? Desire of preference. What is preference? Desire but what is about preference? When there are two subjects or two things and you have to decide which you should continue, whether for the first one or the second one, that is deciding between two different words, deciding between two different subjects. So that is preference. Would you like to go by bus or car? The picture is showing about a bus or car. Which one would you like to prefer? The preference has been asked. Or would you like to have tea or coffee? Or would you go with the right thing or you would go with the left or wrong thing, right? So everywhere where you require to have a preference, you always have two different subjects. You always show your desire